Hello, Econ372. Welcome to another walkthrough video. So in this video specifically, we're going to be focusing on the impact of a quota. So this is covered in Chapter 5, your non-tariff barriers. It's very similar to conducting a tariff analysis. So we're just going to walk through the steps. We're going to go over a practice problem. This is a practice problem that's on your slides. Now we're just going to go over it in a little bit more in depth. So in this case, we're looking at the market for cheese. We're looking at the United States and we're looking at the European Union. So in this case, we're assuming that the United States is a small country. Basically, they have very little influence on the global market. And when you implement a quota is just a reduction in how much you can import. You can do this through import licenses, which we'll talk about later on in this chapter. There's different ways you can do this, but for now, we're just going to look at an absolute quota. So basically you're saying you can only allow X amount of whatever product. So in this case, we're looking at pounds of cheese in the two countries, the United States and the European Union. So when we say US is small, we're assuming we have a lot more consumers than producers. There's not as much as influence on the global market. And we're saying the European Union does have an impact. They're the main producer in this case. So here we have a practice problem. So we have a price of cheese on our Y, quantity of cheese. It's going to be in terms of pounds on our X, and we have the supply for the United States and the demand for the United States. So people who demand, consumers, people who supply are producers. This is the domestic market so far. So we'll add in European Union. We'll see what happens. So a couple different points. If we were to look at autarky would be right here. Again, autarky meaning no trade. There is no consumption or production, or there's no consumption of foreign goods. We're just consuming what we produce. So in this case, our quota or looking at autarky is not as important. We want to focus on when we open up trade as well as implementing the quota itself. So again, European Union and the United States. USA is small in this case. So first, we're going to assume with trade, with free trade, we're going to say the world price is at $2.50. So we're going to label this as EU. So this is the European supply or European Union supply. Now we have a couple of specific points. Right here is 1, and then right here is 8. So we're going to look at what each of these points mean. So on the supply curve, this is the amount or the pounds of cheese that domestic producers produce. So in the United States, we produce 1 pound of cheese when the price is $2.50. Now, our consumers here in the United States, when the price is $2.50, we demand 8 pounds of cheese. So you see this gap in between here. The way we bridge this gap is through importing. So the gap between 1 and 8 is 7. So what we're going to do is import 7 pounds of cheese from the European Union when the price is at $2.50. Now, when we see the price is $2.50, the reason why a lot of people don't want to produce or domestic producers can't produce at this price, because again, there's no incentive to go out and produce. Now, for consumers, we want to consume much more because the price is much lower. Law of demand, law of supply still apply to this example. So in this case, we're going to import 7 pounds of cheese. Again, it's the gap between the world prices. Again, this is our domestic quantity supplied. This is our domestic quantity demanded. There's a gap. That gap is our import. All right, so now let's say we impose a quota. So now we're going to say the quota is 3 pounds. So we can only import 3 pounds of cheese from different countries as opposed to what we have right now. So this is free trade where we import 7. Now our quota is going to be 3 pounds. So the gap that we want to create is going to be in between 3 and 6. So if we were just to inch closer and closer and closer to this autarky point, the gap should equal 3 somewhere. So in this case, it's going to be at $5. So we'll call this SEU plus Q, implementing the quota. So now we'll see new points. So this point right here is at 3. This point right here should be at 6. So now, if you look at the gap between 3 and 6, it is 3 pounds. So we have successfully implemented our quota. So the gap here is 3 pounds. Previously, it was 7 pounds. Now we still have our quota. Now we'll see how the market has changed. So now, again, this point, this is our domestic producer. Domestic producers want to produce much more. They want to produce much more because the price is higher. Now it's $5 compared to $2.50. So now they want to produce 3 pounds of cheese compared to 1 at $2.50. Now the domestic consumer, we want to consume less. We consume less because the price is higher. The higher the price, the less we want something, or the lower the quantity demanded. So again, law of demand, law of supply, and we still have this quota. So again, this is 3 pounds. We meet our quota. So now, from here, we're going to calculate consumer producer surplus, deadweight loss, and so forth. All right, so now what we're going to do is calculate consumer surplus for free trade. So FT is free trade, producer surplus for free trade, and deadweight loss with this free trade. So again, I cleaned up the graph a little bit. We're going to do it piece by piece. So first, we're going to do the consumer surplus for free trade. So we're looking at this area right here. This is the area we're trying to calculate for consumer surplus. So it's a difference between 10 and 250, and you're going to multiply that by 8 and then divide by 2. So with free trade, it should come out to 30 units. And now we're going to calculate producer surplus. So this was consumer surplus. This area right here, this is going to be your producer surplus. Now you're going to calculate the difference between 0 and 250, multiply by 1, divide by 2, and you're going to get 125. Now, our deadweight loss in this case is going to be 0. Again, there's no inefficiencies at this point. We're assuming we have free trade, and total surplus, which is just consumer plus producer surplus, is 3125. There's no revenue being generated right now, so we'll talk about that in a second. But this is how you calculate consumer, producer, deadweight loss, and total surplus for a quota in free trade. All right, so now what we're going to do is calculate the consumer, producer, total surplus, and deadweight loss for the quota. So again, we have the quota set in place. Our quota is 3 pounds. So again, it's the gap between here. Our original one was with free trade. Again, that's EU. EU plus Q is your quota. So now you're going to calculate your consumer surplus. Your new consumer surplus is this area now. So the one I'm drawing in right now, it's at this point. So this is your consumer surplus. So it's the gap between 10 and 5, which is 5. 5 times 6. And then you're going to divide by 2. So your consumer surplus should be 15. So we already noticed that our consumer surplus is much less when we have a quota or any of these non-tariff barriers. This is an inefficiency to an extent because we'll see a deadweight loss as well. So now what we're going to calculate is our producer surplus. Our producer surplus is this area right here. So if you just calculate the area of that triangle, so from 0 to 5, multiplied by 0 to 5, multiplied by 3, divided by 2, your consumer surplus, or your producer surplus in this case, is 7.5. So again, you just add these two together and you'll get your total surplus, which is 22.5. 22.5. So now what we're left with is these two areas and this rectangle right here, and we're going to calculate our deadweight loss. Our deadweight loss are these triangles added together. So again, you have your consumption effect and also your production effect. So here, there's some deadweight loss to foreign producers and also domestic consumers. So this is the impact that it has. So you're going to calculate the area of these triangles. So from 250 to 5, that's the height. The base is going to be 2. So your deadweight loss, you're going to add this triangle plus this triangle. You should get $5 or 5 units. So this is the deadweight loss. Now, one of the areas we haven't talked about yet is this middle portion right here. This middle rectangle right here, this is going to be the revenue, so to speak, that's generated from your quota. So what we call this is it's based off of our revenue effect, and it represents quota rent. So quota rent or windfall profit. That's what we call this. Now, if we wanted to calculate this, you could. It's just the quota itself multiplied by 250. So in this case, it's 250 times 3, which is going to be 7.5. Now, originally when we had a tariff, it would be implemented and the government would generate some form of revenue. Now in this case, it doesn't necessarily go to just the government. It can go to different groups. So it could go to the exporting country, it could go to the importing country, or it could go to the government. So a couple of ways that can happen is, so let's look at the European Union. If they're exporting countries, let's just say they have a monopoly on producing cheese. So if they have a monopoly on producing cheese, they can sell at a much higher price to the US, who are competitive firms. So they take the price that's set. Again, they're a small market. Again, we introduced that they are small. If they're a monopoly, they can charge a higher price. So based on our example, they could charge $5, and this portion, this windfall profit or quota rent, same thing, this would go to the exporting country in that case. Now, that's if they are a monopoly. Now, if the US, the importing firms, let's just say we look at grocery stores, and for some reason we have a monopoly on grocery stores, all these grocery stores can buy it at a lower price from these competitive firms from European Union. So, meaning that they get to choose what price that they sell it back to domestic consumers. So in that case, this portion right here would go to the US importing firms, and they would sell at a higher price. Again, it still results in a deadweight loss, but this portion would go to US importing firms. Now, another way the government can get involved and get that portion on the graph as well, or the quota rent or windfall profit, is if they sell importing licenses. So this is also in Chapter 5. If you sell an importing license in terms of an auction, let's just say, basically you're bidding for this license to be able to import products. If you import products, you can sell at a higher price, however you want. Now, whoever wins this bid is saying that they're willing to pay a higher amount in order to sell these products. So through this bidding process, the government would get this bidding amount. Whoever wins, so whoever's willing to pay the most, they're going to be able to attain this importing license, and through this, they can the government generates revenue and they capture that profit. So in this case, whether it be the European Union as an exporting country, that's a monopoly, they would get 7.5. If it's a U.S. importing company, or if we have a monopoly on that, we would get 7.5. Or if the government auctions off these licenses to import, they would get 7.5. But regardless, anytime we have a quota, there is an inefficiency. So it's not just, okay, we should just only implement a tariff, or we should only implement a quota. With both, there is still a deadweight loss. And as we see with our analysis, we see our consumer producer surplus decrease, our total surplus decrease, as well as our deadweight loss. We incur a deadweight loss. So that's going to be it for the impact of a quota. You should know this for the exam as well as future assignments. And I'll be uploading more videos shortly. If you guys have questions, drop a comment, email me, anything that helps you guys, reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help you guys. So just let me know. Thank you guys.